Our first keynote is with Marco Vernocchi. Marco is the Global Chief Data Officer at EY, and we're talking about getting value from data in the AI age. Hello Marco, thank you for joining us. Brilliant to see you. Let's straight over to you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, everybody. Good morning. It's a great pleasure being with you today. And as you said, I am Marco Vernocchi, and I joined EY 5 years ago as its first Global Chief Data Officer. And it may be useful to start briefly sharing with you the business context that I'm working on daily. EY, many of you are maybe familiar with EY, but EY is a large organization representing approximately $50 billion and more than 400,000 professionals operating across more than 100 countries and about 20 sectors or industries, and delivering services across 4 major business units. We call them service lines, and they are assurance, tax, consulting, and then strategy and transactions. So we range in between highly regulated businesses such as audit and more customized services such as consult. Today, I will try sharing with you some observations, some considerations that arise from my own journey at EY. I hope you will find them interesting because they are real-life considerations. So as I jump into the topic for the day, everyone is well aware, right? So I don't need to make too much introduction. GenAI has been a huge accelerator of change, and is opening unlimited opportunities by exponentially augmenting both the human and the system possibilities. You can easily try new, to be honest, very often amazing experiences of interaction with content and technology that we never had before. And again, I'm not going to too many examples because I'm sure that is pretty familiar to you. What I want to focus the attention is that at the same time, behind the scenes, GenAI is nothing else than an additional operating model that has to be managed, and it brings a growing operational complexity for all of those that need to run organizations of any kind, regardless of the scale, the size, the sector, the geography. This growing complexity is something that is in front of us. Now, in order to deal with this growing complexity, I think we need to have an interpretation model. I think there are 5 dimensions that we should always consider when we discuss about GenAI. Those 5 dimensions are value in the various forms of business, services, products, experiences. The second is trust in the forms of risk prevention, risk protection, compliance, remediation. And the other 3 are intelligence, data, and technology. And I will expand a bit more on those. Now, as a consequence, a first and only apparently obvious consideration is that GenAI is multidisciplinary. It requires a high degree of cooperation and teaming across organizations. So no single department, no single function, and certainly no single individual can have all the required skills to drive this profound transformation. On the opposite, the need of learning from each other within and across departments and within and across organizations will be a key to succeed. So in short, GenAI is a team sport, it's not an individual sport. Today, and only due to time constraints, I will not focus on the dimension of trust, one of the 5 that I mentioned, but I like to underline that by no means does that undervalue its relevance across the 5 dimensions. It's just an element of time constraints. Let me start from the dimension of value. And when I joined EY about 5 years ago, my first task was to define the EY's data strategy. Those days, to just go back a few years, GenAI was not on the radar of no one. but AI was very well established. And what became soon very clear to me was that the speed, the scope, and the scale of transformation required, I would define, required an obsessive focus on results and sharp execution, while at the same time we're trying to explore and getting ready for what I could call the new frontier. A few years later, and now Gen AI is in front of all of us, this same principle that I would summarize as value first is even more true and relevant than ever before. Now, the combination of value, opportunity, the 5 dimensions of Gen AI that I briefly mentioned a moment ago, and the required speed of execution, they apply if you're working on a specific Gen AI-based solution, but they also apply if you're working on transforming a business function, an enterprise, or an entire business ecosystem. So in a sense, no one is immune of this context, regardless of the scope or the subject that we're busy with. But because the new context is broad and complex, we also need to break the case into manageable pieces. We need to find a way to break down the complexity. This is taking me to a very important message that I'd like to share with you, if you like, a lesson that I learned all along the journey. To make sure that those pieces are meaningful and sustainable, I believe that staying very close to the business, whatever the business represents in your own context, is crucial in selecting the key priorities, and it becomes of paramount importance. So staying close to the business is crucial. Again, that may seem an easy principle, but it's not, especially for the people that are working on the technology, on the AI, on data, supporting the business. As I said before, value first, business first, the rest should follow. Now, prioritization, in fact, may seem, as I said, a simple principle, but in fact, it's not. Is very difficult due to conflicting interests and trade-offs that happen across each organization, particularly balancing the short-term versus the long-term horizons. Prioritization, though, is very important because it defines investments, and those investments shape the future positioning and competitiveness of an organization. So the prioritization exercise is not a trivial question at all. And when dealing with prioritization, I'm sure that many of you, if not all of you, adopted, at some extent, a use case approach. And indeed, use cases represent a good approach to define priorities and qualify goals. However, we also experienced that in the recent past, when approaching use cases, we keep experiencing many proof of concept or proof of values that usually create excitement, they create expectations, but are not always considering scalability upfront. So too often, a proof of value fails when it needs to move from small to big. In addition, use cases also tend to be short-term oriented and focus on new ways of doing the same things. That's why I like to share with you and highlight a new concept or a new word, which I would call it future cases, as a way to imagining new things that can be done. Future cases challenge the status quo and are usually more difficult to realize than use cases. They require imagination, longer-term vision, high commitment and investments. But the future cases are the ones that, when successful, they drive disruption in the competitive landscape. Now, introducing the concept of future cases, it's a good way to frame and define priorities. So it's again about prioritization, but making possible comparing ways of doing the same things, okay, new ways of doing the same things, with imagining new things that can be done. Now, whether you focus on use cases, future cases, or both, as it may be the case, my simple recommendation goes back to my previous principle: value first, has to be the North Star. Let me now turn the discussion on the second and third dimension that I mentioned at the beginning, which is data and intelligence. I think it's probably worth sharing with you some background information about the efforts EY is dedicating to AI in its various forms. I share with you some data points. So EY has invested about $1.4 billion in embedding AI into our own platforms. To date, approximately 60,000 EY clients and more than 1.5 million unique client users are using AI-enabled EY technologies. EY is one of the first professional services organizations to roll out a private LLM, large language model, globally. We call it EYQ. And there are over 100,000 people at EY who completed AI analytics and data training programs. Now, I hope these facts indicate that, as many of you, we've been running the AI race, the AI journey, and we learn from the field as you did. So I think the message here is that we have our skin in the game. And as myself, you probably heard the phrase, no data, no AI. I think that phrase is true, is accurate. I'm also sure you heard a probably more popular phrase, which is AI-ready data. And this is where I think the concept is less obvious and probably more challenging. In fact, if you think of all of the data that your organization manages, then probably data will never be completely ready for Gen AI. So you may argue that the data will not be AI-ready data, given the complexity of the data that we manage, the scale and the scope. The reality is that they probably have never been completely ready, to be honest, for other AI techniques or for traditional analytical applications that we have been used to develop to date. And while Gen AI as a new AI technique brings its own characteristics, specific activities, new concepts such as LLM, prompts, vectorization, RAGs, and you can name a long list of those. Gen AI makes no exception. It sits on top of data, and to be honest, Gen AI will not wait for perfection. Again, given the scale of complexity and the challenge of having all of your data AI ready, right? Also in this case, I think we should prioritize the domains of data that fit a specific and targeted Gen AI purpose and think of AI-ready data for that specific case. Once again, this may seem obvious, but is not necessarily a given in the normal business discussions. That said, let me be very clear. That should be no give up on constantly trying to improve collective readiness of data. Of course, that are accurate and reliable. Data that are of high quality will make a difference. Structured data based on traditional data management will continue to be relevant. The reality is that effective and high quality data management is hard for organizations. With the attention driven by Gen AI, there is a fair chance to invest more and better, maybe using Gen AI itself, to further enhance and modernize data management. And we can think of that side as focused on making data available for Gen AI use. But that's not enough, because at the same time, we should introduce new ways of articulating and approaching the AI-ready data questions. Data need to be prepared, even when available, they need to be prepared, transformed for Gen AI use, for example, by means of vectorization and other techniques. This is particularly true for the unstructured data, where at the moment most of the Gen AI excitement is. In this sense, I think it's important to reflect on how Gen AI uses data, which is contextually. Business context is key to make data usable. Data can be of different formats, coming from different sources, internal or external to an organization, and they need to be linked together. But context is created by means of metadata. And it's worth underlining that regardless of any possible and useful categorization of metadata, passive or active or automated, technical metadata, operational or business metadata, metadata will become key, and they will become central for any Gen AI future development. And now that takes me to the knowledge graphs, because knowledge graphs bring context and metadata together because they focus on relationship. Again, there are multiple definitions of a knowledge graph, and you can pick up the one that you prefer. But in essence, you can think of them as a collection of graphs of data that are using relationships and semantics as a mechanism of interconnection. And in essence, Gen AI uses semantics at its core. And knowledge graphs help setting the type of question that can be asked from the underlying data models and will enable higher accuracy to LLM-based solutions. So knowledge graphs together with metadata will be the next frontier of developments when it comes to data and intelligence. And this is eventually taking me to the final dimensions for today, which is technology. EY has invested for a number of years in what we call the EY Trusted Data Fabric. When I joined EY, one of the first questions I had to address was about the overall data architecture and the approach to data technologies. With a large number of independent platforms and targeted solutions across the entire organization, the challenge was to find a feasible way, feasible, I mean both technically and financially, to achieve the goal of creating value through sharing permissible data across the organization. And the EY Trusted Data Fabric has been the answer that we selected at that point in time. Set in simple terms, the data pipelines and supply chains could be distributed and federated through a semantic layer that will take care of, let's say, the metadata management, the data policies that define access and usage of data. Now, if you look in the technology landscape, data fabrics are becoming and emerging more and more as the reference architecture for advanced data management, enabling access and sharing across the organizations of permissible data through a different set of functionalities, virtualization techniques, orchestration of metadata and semantics, and use of knowledge graphs, as I mentioned before. So based on my previous comments about the importance of metadata and knowledge graphs, it becomes pretty evident, I hope, that data fabrics will represent an excellent solution to enable contextual Gen AI. However, a data fabric is not a single product or a solution available as is in the market. It's an architecture that requires assembling different products. In addition, as I presume many of you are well aware, the scope and the degree and the maturity of each of those products can be very different, and there is no simple and obvious combination to package and integrate those. So the heavy effort of integration is left to each organization. And that is absolutely not an easy task. Some products are hard to integrate. They do not necessarily satisfy end-to-end requirements. They may be unclear on their own roadmaps, and so on and so forth. So the good news is that we are progressively observing a consolidation or a convergence of a very fragmented software market into a more consistent and end-to-end solutions that will hopefully make the life of many data and tech departments much easier. In closing and summarizing, I mentioned to you a few concepts. The 5 dimensions of Gen AI, the value first principle, the importance of prioritization, and the concept of future cases. Then I jumped into the concept of fit-for-purpose logic of AI-ready data, the opportunity to use Gen AI to modernize traditional data management, the centricity of metadata in any form, and the key role of knowledge graphs moving forward. And then the emergence of data fabrics as a reference architecture, and the progressive convergence of a very fragmented software. These are messages that, as I said, come from the real life experience, and I hope you found these concepts useful to you. With that, I stop here. Thank you for your attention, and I think we may have a few more minutes for a few questions, but team, I'll let you take control.
Marco, thank you very much indeed. That was absolutely brilliant. A great way to kick off today's event, and thank you. You're right, we've had some questions coming in. You talked about prioritizing use cases. What are the KPIs and factors based on which use cases should ideally be prioritized? That's the first question.
Well, I think this is a very difficult question for those that try to do that. So I give you maybe some categories, okay? One is, and I think probably there are 4 or 5 large categories you can consider. One is the time to market of innovation. The second one is about the business potential, the value that you create in terms of sales or revenues. The third one is the cost efficiency, if you save money in performing specific tasks. The third one is the quality, if you are improving the relevance of the outcomes that you are producing. And the last one, last but not least, is the risk side of it. So if you are reducing or eliminating or controlling risks that are in the scope. Those 5 dimensions should be considered in defining the prioritization of one case versus another one.
Okay, and I'm conscious of the time, Marco. I fear we've got time for just one more question. Lawrence, thank you for sending this through. Look, Gen AI is currently a cheap resource, he says. However, given the huge energy costs that will need to be passed on, is ROI to decrease in the midterm, reducing its value?
Again, hard to say. What is true is that there's also a downside of Gen AI. There are multiple costs associated with Gen AI. It's not only the energy cost, it's also the training cost of the people, is the cost of hosting, the cost of software that is needed. So there are multiple new cost factors that need to be taken into consideration, and they need to be factored into the overall business plans and equation. That said, I think that none of them will be big enough to diminish the power and the impact of Gen AI that will be pervasive and exponential.
Okay, Marco, look, that was the last question we had time for, so we have to leave it there. Thank you. It's been a brilliant start to today's event. Fascinating. We've had more questions coming. We simply don't have the time to go to them. But thanks a million for joining us and kicking off this event so well.